We live in a culture obsessed with noise. If you aren't constantly talking, posting, or participating, something must be fundamentally wrong with you. The modern world treats solitude like a disease, a sad consolation prize for people who just couldn't figure out how to be popular. They call you antisocial. They call you depressed. But what if the whole diagnosis is a lie? What if your need to be alone isn't a bug in your software, but a highly advanced feature? Neuroscience paints a picture that society ignores, proving that your empty room is actually the most active place on Earth. Let's get one thing straight. Choosing to stay home on a Friday night, ignoring the group chat, watching the rain hit the glass instead of forcing small talk. This is not avoidance. You aren't running away from reality. You are finally aligning with it. Your nervous system isn't shutting down when you're alone, it's booting up. The outside world demands a performance. It demands a mask. But isolation is the only environment where your mind doesn't have to perform for an audience. It just gets to work. Think about the sheer amount of energy you've burned trying to be normal. Think about all those times you forced yourself into crowded rooms, nodding along to conversations that felt completely hollow. You did it because you were told that connection is everything. But instead of feeling connected, you just felt empty. You felt like an actor in a play where everyone else had the script, and you were just waiting for the curtain to fall. That exhaustion you feel after socializing, it's not because you are weak, it's because you are actively fighting your own nature. You're using massive amounts of cognitive fuel trying to suppress your internal world, just to match the slow, shallow pace of the external one. And this isn't just some philosophical theory, it is hardwired neurobiology. When most people sit in silence, their brain activity drops. But for people with high internal complexity, neuroscientists have observed something fascinating. It's called the default mode network, or the DMN. This is the part of your brain responsible for deep reflection, connecting abstract ideas, and wandering through complex thoughts. When you're alone, and the physical world stops demanding your attention, your DMN lights up like a city grid at night. Your brain interprets silence not as a void to be feared, but as a blank canvas to be used. This high internal stimulus is exactly why you don't need a crowd to feel alive. It's not damage, it's not dysfunction, it is design. This explains the great paradox of your life. You can fiercely love your friends and still have zero desire to see them most of the time. People confuse the desire for distance with a lack of affection. They take it personally, but it has nothing to do with them. Interacting with another human being requires you to pause your intense, rapid-fire internal monologue so you can process their words, their emotions, their expectations. It is a heavy cognitive tax. Socializing drains your battery not because you hate people, but because your brain has to shut down its natural, high-speed flow to match a shared frequency. You need isolation simply to pay off that social debt and return to your baseline. The problem is, we live in a culture that worships the extrovert. Society tells you that your home is plan B. The club, the networking event, the endless grind of visibility. That's plan A. If you choose to stay in, you are bombarded with messages that you are missing out, that you are wasting your youth or your potential. But for a mind that runs on high internal stimulus, the noise of the crowd is the real waste of time. The endless scrolling, the loud music, the meaningless chatter. These are distractions from the real work happening inside your head. For you, the quiet room isn't plan B. It is the absolute, undisputed plan A. It is the control center. If you're listening to this, you probably lived through 4 distinct psychological stages. First, there was accommodation. You forced yourself to go out, you wore the mask, you drank the coffee, smiled, and played the game. Then came guilt. You'd leave early, sit in your car, and wonder, what the hell is wrong with me? Why is this so easy for them and so painful for me? That guilt eventually curdled into resentment. You started to hate the expectations. You hated the texts asking, "Where are you?" You resented a world that wouldn't just let you be. But finally, if you're lucky, you reach acceptance. You realize the mask was the problem, not your face. You stop fighting the silence and you let it wrap around you. You accept that this is simply how your machine operates. It's a hard acceptance, though, because human beings are tribal animals. At our core, a primitive part of our brain tells us that if we wander away from the campfire, we will die. So when your family makes passive-aggressive comments about you being a hermit, or when you see a feed full of people partying, that primitive alarm bell rings, but you have to silence it, because forcing a deeply analytical, highly active mind into a constant state of external stimulation doesn't bring connection, it brings anxiety. Honoring your own temperament isn't selfish, it is cognitive survival. We need to completely redefine what it means to live your life. Society measures life by participation. How many events did you attend? How many photos did you take? How many hands did you shake? But participation is cheap. You can be physically present in 100 different rooms and be completely dead inside. Real life is measured by presence. You can sit perfectly still, entirely alone in a dim room, listening to the rain, and be so profoundly present, so deeply engaged with your own thoughts, that you experience more life in 10 minutes than most people do in 10 years of partying. Never let them tell you that your isolation makes you superficial. It's exactly the opposite, because you spread your energy across fewer people and fewer events. The connections you do make are impossibly deep. You trade shallow quantity for profound quality. More importantly, isolation is the fundamental requirement for what psychologists call deep work. Innovation, creative synthesis, solving complex problems. These things demand sustained, unbroken attention. You cannot stitch together the fragmented pieces of a grand idea while someone is asking you about the weather. You need the frictionless environment of solitude to turn raw thoughts into coherent brilliance. Your solitude is a forge, while others are desperately swiping on their phones, terrified of being alone with their own thoughts for even 5 seconds. You are building worlds inside yours. You possess an autonomous engine. You have a rich, complex inner life that does not rely on cheap external validation to keep you entertained. In a modern era completely addicted to dopamine and distraction, a mind that can sit quietly and generate its own meaning is not just rare, it is a superpower. But I know it still gets heavy. Even with all the science and all the understanding, there are nights when the quiet feels a bit too sharp. It hurts. But you need to understand where that pain comes from. You aren't hurting because you are lonely, you are hurting because you are misunderstood. The ache comes from living in a world that looks at your sanctuary and calls it a prison. It comes from having to constantly defend your own peace, and that is a heavy burden to carry. This is why you have to reject the most toxic piece of modern advice out there. Step out of your comfort zone. Self-help gurus scream it like a religion. But they don't know you if you have spent your entire life burning yourself to the ground trying to survive in their extroverted comfort zone. Then pushing yourself outward isn't growth, it's self-harm. For you, true growth is stepping into your comfort zone, locking the door and refusing to apologize for it. True growth is having the quiet courage to defend your boundaries against the loud expectations of the culture. So let them judge, let them think you are missing out. You know the truth. The door is closed, but the mind is wide open. Your solitude is not a lack of social skills. It is not an empty space waiting to be filled by noise. It is an intensely beautiful, highly active world of your own creation. Your version of a good life is just quieter than the world expects. It's not wrong, it's just honest.